To live a holistic, rich, full life, we need to live in at least 3 dimensions. But actually, we need to live in 4 dimensions, which Einstein and then others understood to be time. How do we do that? And if we cannot see the 4th dimension, and we can't experience it, and we can't use it for time travel, what's the point in knowing about it? So you just watched a few seconds of a short clip in 2D, in 2 dimensions. And even though the characters on the screen appear to have depth and texture, the image was, as you know, actually flat. And then you put on these glasses and you watch the same clip in 3D. And when you did that, you saw a world that you can actually walk into, a reality that is exciting and exhilarating and easy to embrace. And that's because it's the world we're familiar with. It's the world we know. And although you knew when you put those glasses on that it was an illusion, we can so easily imagine living in that world, because we actually live in one, that it's comfortable, it's compelling, it's inviting. But for someone who only knows life in 2 dimensions, the 3rd dimension would be impossible for them to comprehend. And that, according to many researchers, is the reason we don't feel ourselves living in 4 dimension, or any other dimension beyond that for that matter. Physicists teach us that there are at least 10 dimensions, but the majority of us never see them because we know life only in 3D. Our brains don't understand how to look for anything more. And we crave that 3D experience. This is why achieving the illusion of 3 dimensions via various techniques is vastly important in the arts, because it satisfies the viewer's innate desire for visual replication of our real world. And what artists do by incorporating convincing depth into art pieces, they tap into the viewer's visual memory and processes of perception, tricking our minds and our eyes into construing flat shapes as having volume and inhabiting a 3-dimensional realm. It draws the audience into this fictional scene because it captivates our imagination, and it therefore allows for much more complex narratives to unfold by permitting objects to, as it were, interact across space. And the same is true in writing. Many can tell a story in a purely visual way, and the reader can get a good sense of what something looks like and how a situation appears. That's 2-dimensional writing. 3-dimensional writing is when, in addition to what the character is seeing, you describe what they're hearing, smelling, feeling, and if it's apropos, eating. The more senses you describe, the more visceral and rich it will feel to the readers. And rather than something flat and observed, the action will feel 3-dimensional and lived. As we all know, art imitates life. I know the converse can also be true. To live a holistic, rich, full life, we need to live in at least 3 dimensions. But actually, we need to live in 4 dimensions, which Einstein and then others understood to be time. How do we do that? And if we cannot see the 4th dimension, and we can't experience it, and we can't use it for time travel, what's the point in knowing about it? No one more pointedly, more clearly, more radically, more originally taught to these questions than did the Rebbe. For many, many, many years, the Rebbe held Farbrengens on Shabbatot, on Shabbosim, on Saturdays. And over the years, more and more and more people would attend these gatherings. And at these gatherings, as the years progressed, the Rebbe added more and more dimension, more strata, more wealth to these offerings. And very, very often, the Farbrengen, the gathering, included studying a particular Rashi, the medieval commentator, the most important expositor of the Bible and the Talmud. So the Rebbe would put a Rashi under the microscope and hyper-analyze it. He would do the same to a teaching from the Zohar, the Bible of Jewish mysticism. He would do the same to a teaching from Maimonides' Magnus Opus, the Mishnah Torah, at a certain point in history. And he did the same with Mishnayot, with teachings or paragraphs in the most widely known, most widely embraced and beloved aspect of the Mishnah called Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our fathers. One Shabbat, it was a summer in 1978, there is a custom to learn Pirkei Avot, to learn the ethics of our fathers between Passover and Shavuot, and then to continue through the summer. So the Rebbe would always speak to a Mishnah in the chapter of Pirkei Avot that was understudied that week in the cycle. And one Shabbat in 1978, instead of probing one particular Mishnah in the chapter studied that week, the Rebbe zoomed out and he asked the following question, and this is where you get down to work with me. This is not a spectator sport. So you have the citations here. So the Rebbe asked the following about chapter 5 in the Ethics of Our Fathers. He said, chapter 5 is famous for addressing groupings of historic events, teachings, characteristics, bundled in cohorts of 10, 7, and 4. Look at text 1, please. And here you have just the first few words of the opening 4 Mishnayot, the opening 4 teachings in chapter 5. The first says, the world was created via 10 utterances. The second says there were 10 generations from Abraham to Noah. The third says Abraham was given 10 tests. The fourth says 10 miracles were done for our ancestors in Egypt and another 10 at the sea. And this is all very fascinating stuff, but I have a very circumscribed amount of minutes, so we're going to gloss over all of that. And I just wanted to show you an illustration, okay? This is how chapter 5 begins. Then it goes into teachings that are bundled in 7s. Then it goes into teachings that are bundled in 4s. And the Rebbe says, this is very curious. Why 10, 7, and 4, but stop short of giving us teachings bundled by 3s? Now, many commentators see the literary construction of the Mishnah as driven primarily by the need for this copious amount of information to be transmitted in punctilious manner, all while being kept oral. Okay? For many generations, this was not written down. So all types of mnemonic devices were used. And one is bundling or coupling by number. But for the Rebbe, there is no aspect of the Torah that is utilitarian. There is no aspect of the Torah that is unimportant. In his teachings, he trains that microscope on every word, on the syntax, on the sentence structure, and even the order in which information is conveyed. And he therefore insists that there must be a profound reason that the Mishnah does not list teachings in cohorts of 3. Why does the number 3 not make the cut in chapter 5? Again, where you have teachings by 10, teachings by 7, teachings by 4. Now, this is especially odd because the number 3 is a very important number in our tradition. uniquely so. For instance, we know that in Jewish law, once something is done 3 times, it acquires a certain permanence. This in Hebrew is called chazakah, strength. Once we have done something 3 times, we've connected to it, we've tethered it to this world in enduring fashion. And that's why we do many things in 3s, because it adds strength to our actions. For example, the Amidah, the silent devotion, is repeated thrice daily. When you read from the Torah, there are always 3 people standing where a Torah scroll is read. The minimum number of verses in any aliyah is 3 verses. The minimum number of aliyot on any given day is 3. You get the point. One might posit, based on this, says the Rebbe, that it is the very prominence of the number, or rather, the very fact that it is so basic to Judaism that it's not included in Pirkei Avot. Why? Because Pirkei Avot is not about the basics. Pirkei Avot is about the extras, going above and beyond the letter of the law. So you're not going to find things like don't eat pig in Pirkei Avot. It doesn't make the cut. Okay? So the Rebbe says, no, I hear what you're saying, but that's not speaking to me. You might think that maybe because 3 is so key, it's too basic to make it into Mishnah Pirkei Avot. It's too axiomatic. But the Rebbe says that cannot possibly be the answer, because in this very text, Pirkei Avot, in other chapters, and even in chapter 5, we see that there are individual teachings, Mishnayot, that are presented in units of 3. So please take a look at text 2. Text 2 is a Mishnah from the very same chapter. So it's chapter 5, and it says, whoever possesses the following 3 traits is a student of our patriarch Abraham, but if they possess the 3 contrary traits, they are students of the evil Balaam. And then the Mishnah goes on to delineate, what those character traits might be. Oh, you say, that's why chapter 5 doesn't deal with a whole bunch of Mishnayot bundled by 3, because there's only one. That's not enough for a canon, for a rhythm. Nope, says the Rebbe. Number 3 is ubiquitous in Pirkei Avot. Take a look at text 3a. Here, the whole Pirkei Avot begins by saying, Moses received the Torah from God at Sinai, he transmitted it to Joshua, Joshua to the elders, etc., etc. And what did the men of the great assembly promote? 3 matters of counsel. Be patient in judgment, raise many students, and enact guardrails for the laws of the Torah. And then the next Mishnah deals in 3. The world stands on 3 things, on the Torah, on divine service, and on acts of kindness. Oh, just kidding. And the 18th Mishnah in chapter 1 says the world stands on 3 things, on judgment, on truth, and peace. Okay. Why not take all of these Mishnayot that we just looked through, and more, that are bundled by 3, and put them into chapter 5. So you have things delineated under number 10, then 7, then 4, then 3. That would make a lot of sense. How much sense would it make? Well, says the Rebbe, take a look. Take a look at text 4. And now, the Rebbe is going to not only answer this question, but uncover the profundity of 3 dimension. Take a look at text 4. This is from the Talmud. The Talmud relates, a certain Galilean sage expounded before Rabbi Chizda, and he said, Blessed be the merciful God who gave a 3-fold Torah, comprised of the Bible, the prophets, and the writings, to a 3-fold nation comprised of priests, of Levites, and Israelites, through the agency of a 3rd born, Moses, who was born after Miriam and Aaron, on the 3rd day of the week of the, it was after 3 days of the nations preparing. In the third month, Sivan, because in the Torah, Nisan is 1, Iyar, and then Sivan. Okay, you look at this and you're like, okay, very cute. I mean, tell me something meaningful. It's cute. It lines up. 3, 3, 3, 3. But what am I supposed to learn from this? The Rebbe says it's very simple. This teaching underscores that the triads, that the three-dimensionality of Torah is not peripheral. It's not tangential, albeit an interesting feature of the Torah, but rather it is at its very core. It turns out that 3 as a number, 3 as an energy, is not too basic to warrant mention in Pirkei Avot, but rather too essential. It's too transcendent. It defies pedestrian delineation in the text. It is too overwhelming. It is too overarching. It's like if I were to call up somebody here to the dais and introduce them to you and say, she's amazing. She breathes spontaneously. And you'd be like, okay, tell me something interesting, right? Because breathing for a healthy person is, let's just say it's part of the definition of a functioning human being, and therefore would not merit mention, but not because it's not important enough. And this, teaches the Rebbe, is why the Talmud underscores the tripartite nature of Torah by citing what seem to be merely interesting facts. But no, says the Rebbe, the three-dimensionality of the Torah is absolutely pivotal. Now, take a look at citation 5. The Rambam, Maimonides, writes, how great is peace? Gadol hashalom. How great is peace? The entire Torah was given to make peace in the world. As it is stated, its pathways are pleasant paths, and all its ways are peace. Okay. That's why the Torah was given, to make peace. How does one achieve peace? So in text 6, the Maharal of Prague, the great Rabbi Yehuda Lowy, explains, the number 2 symbolizes a plurality that cannot unite. Let's go back. Can you talk about number 1 and talk about peace? There's one person in the room and, well, maybe you can. Maybe they're not at peace with themselves. But in the conventional terminology of peace, you wouldn't be like, oh, this one person who lives in their house is living at peace in their house. They live by themselves. Hopefully, presumably, they're living at peace. So peace and 1, no. What about peace and 2? So the Maharal says, 2 can never unite. The number 3, by contrast, symbolizes unity. We observe this when depicting the numbers. Take a look, he says, 2 adjacent lines. Either you have them running parallel to each other. They can run parallel to each other until the cows come home. Or you can put them next to each other at one point, but they're going to be at a disjunction. You have it right there. 2 adjacent lines like this cannot unite and do not appear as one entity. However, when you introduce the 3rd line, triangle, the lines can unite. So if you introduce a 3rd element, you get a new and important construct called the triangle. You get a 3-way system that nourishes every aspect thereof in symbiotic fashion. All right. In terms of our life and our function, what's this all-important 3rd dimension that will bring peace, that will bring fullness, that will bring us vibrancy? So a number of years later, in 1991, during a gathering, again on a Shabbos, the Rebbe dissected yet another Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. So take a look, please, at text 7. And here is one easy way to recognize and appreciate the Rebbe's singular way of learning and teaching Torah. The Mishnah reads, Akavya ben Mahalal would say, ponder these three things and you will not transgress, okay? If you think about these things, you'll never sin. You should know where you came from, you should know where you're going, and you should know before whom you're destined to give judgment and accounting. Where did you come from? From a putrid drop. Where are you going? To a place of soil, worms, and insects. And before whom are you destined to give judgment and accounting? Before the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He. So if you remember just how small is your source and your antecedent, if you remember that in a few tomorrows, a little bit more, a little bit less, you're going to be divested of all your bluster and your sense of self-importance and your agenda, and you're going to a place where there's a lot of insects. And before whom are you going to stand? Before God Almighty. And the Mishnah says, if we could only remember those three things, you'll be set. You won't be sinning. Now the Rebbe looks at this Mishnah and he says, wait a minute. No word in a Mishnah can be superfluous. There's no such thing in the Torah. Why would the Mishnah begin by saying, ponder these three things and you will not transgress? You would think the Mishnah would say, ponder these things and you'll never transgress. We could count. Presumably, the person that's learning Pirkei Avot knows how to count. There are three teachings in this Mishnah. We'll go 1, 2, 3. Why does Akavya ben Mahalel have to tell us ponder these three things? Says the Rebbe, it's two different teachings. Akavya ben Mahalel is saying, ponder these three things and you will not transgress. Period. Then comes the rest of the Mishnah. Now the question becomes, which three things? Which three things do we have to look at so we will never sin? And that's where the Rebbe says, the only way to live life fully, vibrantly, properly, is to live in 3D. We have to understand that our life and the reason for our existence is to be living in 3 dimensions and not simply with 2 components. We might think, says the Rebbe, it's all about us and God. And I think most people will be like, that's pretty good. Because most of the time, it's really a challenge to remember there's something beyond us, right? For most of us, it's me, and I, and myself. And we have very good reasons for being preoccupied with the self. And then we bring God into that. That's holy. That's pious. You're doing good. No, says the Rebbe. Catastrophic mistake to live life in 2 dimensions. Flat, boring, and counterintuitive to what God created the world for. Life is not a binary. Life is a triad. Let's go to citation 8. In the Rebbe's own words, from that Farbrengen, we might assume, he says, that we need to focus on just 2 entities, ourselves and God. In the spirit of the teaching from the Talmud, I was created to serve my Creator. That's 2 dimensions. Me and my Creator. I'm good. The Mishnah, therefore, corrects us and says, ponder 3 things. That's the whole teaching. It's not the preamble to whatever else is in the Mishnah. See, that's the radically new way in which the Rebbe says to read this Mishnah. ponder three things. We need to reflect deeply until we see that there are indeed three entities that require our consideration. For in addition to our own existence, that's the I, and God's existence, that's the Creator, there is a third entity to consider, and that is the existence of the world that God created and through which we serve our Creator. In plain English, if we're not engaging with the world, if we're not understanding that the world is that third dimension that can unite us with God, we're missing the boat. The whole purpose of creation is to create, and these are words the Rebbe never tired of repeating, a dwelling place for God in this lower realm. That is the reason God created the universe, so that we can create a dwelling place for God's presence. And this can only be accomplished through a soul vested in a physical body, traversing the physical plane. And if we focus only on God and the self, even when you're really holy, and the self is understood as a soul, a Jew who is here to adhere to the words of God, you're still missing the point. You're living a flat life with no depth, no vibrancy, and no compelling energy. If you are shunning the world, skirting the world, insulating yourself from the larger world, you are not living in 3D. You are not living in God's plan for creation. Only by engaging with the world, living in it, transforming it, can we accomplish what we came here to do. And so, God tears the neshama, the soul, away from its place where it's basking in God's radiance and warmth. Its life is consummate. It's perfect. It has all the Godiva chocolate and all the sushi it wants. And God says, sorry, you have to follow me into a world that is completely alien to the very fabric of your existence. And as the Tanya teaches, the soul is perfect. The soul does not have to come down here to perfect itself. But only through its work in this world can it achieve elevation. And only through its work in this world can it fulfill what God had in mind for the creation of this universe. And here's the thing. Each one of us gets a part of this world to perfect. So if you think you're sitting this one out, start living. Because there's a part of the world that only your soul can perfect, can elevate, can even engage with. And if you don't believe me, take a look at text 9. Now, the beginning of this teaching from the Talmud, I suspect is going to be familiar to a lot of you. Rabbi Yehuda quoted Rav, 40 days before an embryo is formed, a divine voice emerges and proclaims, the daughter of this particular individual will marry this particular person. Okay, a lot of people have heard this before. In Yiddish, you call this bashert, destined, meant to be. Now, look at what the Talmud continues to say. This exact house will be inhabited by this specific individual. This precise field will belong to this specific person. The socks you're wearing, if you're wearing socks, the clothes you're wearing were allotted to your soul before conception. I'm going to play that back to you. Your car, your couch, your chairs, your pots, your underwear. You think you buy things because they wink at you online, or you walk into a store and it's just the perfect confluence of events. It's your size and the color that makes you look good for a price that you can afford, and it's actually there, and it actually fits you. Thank you. you buy it. Yeah. But you bought it, and it was there for you to pick up, because only you can do something with that sweater. Only your soul can extricate the godly sparks and unleash the energy that this world needs. Only you. So everything we own, everything we are, our financial, emotional, cognitive, artistic resources, our particular connections in life, our particular geographic location, all of the components of our lives are perfectly curated for our direct mission in this broader project of living in 3D, transforming the universe and fashioning it into a dwelling place for the divine. There's a very well-known story with the Chief Rabbi Sachs of blessed memory, who as a student decided to come to the States, and his plan was that he was going to go around the States and he was going to interview great rabbis, great rabbinic figures. And when he came to the Rebbe, something surprising happened. Instead of him doing the interviewing, the Rebbe interviewed him, and he's told the story many, many times. The Rebbe asked him, how many Jewish students are in Cambridge, which is where he was studying? How many are involved in Jewish life? What are you doing to bring other people in? Now, Rabbi Sachs says, you have to understand, I did not come to the Rebbe because I wanted to be a Chabad emissary. I had no intention of becoming a rabbi. I had no intention of him interviewing me. And now he's challenging me. So in his own description, he says, I did a very English thing. He says, nobody can construct English sentences that are more complex excuses for doing nothing than the English. So I started the sentence by saying, in the situation in which I find myself, and Rabbi Sachs said, the Rebbe did something extremely uncharacteristic. He cut him off and he said, nobody finds themselves in a situation. You put yourself in a situation. And if you put yourself in that situation, you can put yourself in another situation. Now, I've heard this vignette hundreds of times probably, and I think that most often this vignette is meant to convey that we should be proactive, that we should be preemptive, that we have control. You know the Hebrew word mazal, right? Most often we understand it to be effluence from above that flows in our life, which totally transcends our efforts. But the Hebrew word mazal is also an acrostic for makom zman la'asot. You make your own mazal by grabbing the space and grabbing the time and doing something with it. But when I started to study these teachings, it seems to me that the Rebbe's words to Rabbi Sachs can be understood even more profoundly, and that is, in the situation where you find yourself, your life circumstances are what you're supposed to be doing. They can never be an impediment, and they are certainly not haphazard, and they are certainly not benign. And you are always a shaliach. You are always an emissary of God, whether formally or less so. And if you understand your situation in one way, you can understand your situation in a totally different way. So if you came into this room thinking to be a good Jew is to live life in 2 dimensions, now we have a new reality. We have got to live in 3 dimensions. This is what our soul came to do. It's on us, the Rebbe taught, to be constantly on the lookout for opportunities and mandates and privileges that lie within the crevices of our part of this world. If something seems like an obstacle, if something seems like a hurdle, that's not blocking us. That's our pathway through which we are meant to live at least that part of our life or that time in our life. Now, you think the Rebbe was satisfied with 3 dimensions? Think again. So that's a good beginning. But you have to live in 4 dimensions. And listen to how the Rebbe teaches us that. And it gives us a whole new appreciation for the arc of Jewish history. The world is not going to implode. It's not going to explode or combust in an end of days apocalypse or Armageddon. The world's going to crescendo. The world is going to come to its apex, to its climax with the Messianic era. And the Rebbe bid us to pay attention to the Hebrew terms for the state in which we are currently found. So if you look on page 7 of your handouts, you see the Hebrew words for exile and the Hebrew word for redemption. And the Rebbe says, seriously? In a tradition that teaches that the letters of the Hebrew alphabet of the Holy Tongue are the very DNA of creation, they are the pathways for creation and constant recreation and vivification of this world. We have two diametrically opposing realities, basically with the same letters, a gimel, a vav, a lamed, and a hey. So exile is spelled with 4 Hebrew letters. Redemption, geula, spelled with 5 letters. 4 out of the 5 are exactly the same letters. It's not computing. You would think, because again, we don't believe that language is arbitrary. Every other language is arbitrary. That's why pain can mean discomfort in one language and bread in another. But in the Holy Tongue, there's nothing arbitrary. The letters of the words are the actual energy of the reality. How could you have exile and redemption energized by the same letters? Thank you. So, says the Rebbe, please take a look at text 10. The Hebrew term for redemption, geula, is the same as the term for exile, gola, but with an additional letter, and that is the aleph. And there's a profound message in this. The purpose of the redemption, geula, is not to negate the exile, gola. I want to read this again. The purpose of redemption is not to negate the exile. Rather, the redemption incorporates the exile. Furthermore, the redemption elevates the exile through introducing and revealing within the exile the aleph, which in the Holy Tongue also means master, aluf, elevating everything to alufo shel olam, the master of the universe. And this is because the intention of creation is that we create a dwelling place for God within the spiritually lowest realm, namely our corporeal world. And this mission includes this lower realm as it exists at its spiritually lowest point, namely during the exile. And our goal here is to reveal the master of the universe in the lowest realm of creation, and specifically in the state in which it exists during exile. All the pain, all the trauma, all the travail, all the difficulties, all the illness, all of it is not a distraction. And by the way, Mashiach is not a prize for hanging in there through all this misery. It's also not the superimposing of a new reality on an old one. It's not like the coming of Mashiach, the redemption, is like a facelift. Like you had one color on your walls and now you're going to elevate it. No, says the Rebbe. Living in 3 dimension leads us right into that 4th dimension. And now that we know about it and we're cognizant of it, we have to live in those 4 dimensions, because everything we are doing now, all of it, what seems to be small and what seems to be huge, is incrementally leading us to that moment of redemption. We have to be able to see the cumulative effect of the spiritual acts of service that have accrued through millennia and that are accruing through our work today, and be able to recognize the redemptive even within what is so low. Can you imagine coming to a theater near you? Films in 4 dimensions. We are just on the cusp. In closing, allow me to share with you a vignette that I come back to again and again and again. Rabbi Herbert Wiener, a longtime Reform rabbi, had a conversation with the Rebbe. This was actually the second of his personal conversations with the Rebbe, a private audience. And he transcribed this conversation, and he is so eloquent, I'm going to give it to you in his words. So Herbert Wiener says, I opened my notebook, I sat back in the chair, again, conscious of how comfortable and relaxing it was to be in the Rebbe's presence. And then I remembered that this was my last chance, and I resolved to ask even the most embarrassing questions in an effort to solve the enigma of Lubavitch, which is the other name for the movement, Chabad. I explained to the Rebbe that more than a year had passed since I began trying to understand the movement, and I had come to him now with a confession. I did not understand. Would he mind, I asked the Rebbe, if I started this interview by asking him about the character of a Hasid? The Rebbe smiled and told me to go ahead. As before, I could speak in English, he would reply to me in Yiddish. Isn't it the fact, I said, that Hasidim turn to the Rebbe for almost every decision in their lives? Isn't this a sign of weakness, a repudiation of the very thing that makes a human being, which is his bechira, his freedom of will? The Rebbe's answer came without hesitation, as if he had dealt with this question before. And he said, a weak person is usually overcome by the environment in which he finds himself. But our Hasidim can be sent into any environment, no matter how strange or hostile, and they maintain themselves within it. So how can we say that it is weakness which characterizes the Hasid? I pressed my question from another angle. I told him that I sensed a desire within Chabad to oversimplify, to strip ideas of their complexity merely for the sake of superficial clarity. As a matter of fact, I blurted out, all of your Hasidim seem to have one thing in common, a sort of open, naive look in their eyes that a sympathetic observer might call tmimut, purity, but that might be less kindly interpreted as emptiness or simple-mindedness, the absence of inner struggle. Herbert Wiener writes, I found myself taken aback by my own boldness. But the Rebbe seemed to show no resentment. He leaned forward and he said to me, what you see missing from their eyes is a kera. A what? I asked. Yes, a kera, he repeated quietly, a split. Dissonance. Lack of calibration, disjunction, a kera. I want to suggest that living in 3D and in 4D is to not suffer a kera, is to not suffer that inner conflict, split, dissonance, confusion. That doesn't mean life is easy. That doesn't mean anything about life is simple. But there's a holistic nature to it. For many people, even many who are very religiously observant, life is bifurcated. There's life, and then there's like Judaism, God, spirituality. But Judaism always has to stay within its compartment, within its allotted draw in the chest called life. And how that draw fits within the overall chest of draws, has to be negotiated, it has to be massaged, it has to be jammed in, it has to be yanked out, it has to be reconciled. Sometimes you just shut it to stay that way for a long time. But if you're normal, you can't ever let it bulge and get too full, because that would be unseemly. So there's a lot of anxiety when you have this thing called Judaism that you have to negotiate. It's not part of your life. It's like a thing. In the Rebbe's teachings, there's a joy and a confidence and a lack of self-consciousness that is unique. It is this wholeness of living fully, with depth, in 3 and 4 dimensions. So next time you find yourself, for instance, in the airport or in a street, and you see these Chabad guys running around with, you got it, the tefillin, and they're on the prowl for Jewish people, to put the tefillin on, Jewish men specifically, and you're thinking to yourself, look at these crazy kids. Don't they know they're in an airport? People came here to travel. People are in a rush. They literally have planes to catch and bills to pay, and you're making a nuisance of yourself. Next time you see these kids, take a look, not only at their face, take a look at their posture, and you tell me if you see any iota of self-consciousness, of apology. I could save you the time. Don't even try looking for it. Nada. It's not there. You know why? Because they are so sure that the Jewish man they're going to put on tefillin with in this airport is only going on this trip because he has to put on tefillin. The whole airport, all of it, operates for this moment in time where this person will be intercepted to put on tefillin. So they're going to apologize? They're going to be self-conscious about this? They're going to worry that anybody thinks that they're crazy because they're not running to the bathroom or to get a coffee or to buy something for 85 times what it's worth? No. They know what they're doing. They know why they're there. But it's not just them. They know why everybody else is there. They know why these flights are going or not going. They know why they're going to leave on time or late. It all has to do with this one thing. Living in 3 and 4 dimensions. Living with joy and harmony and buoyancy. May we all be successful in its acquisition. Have a wonderful retreat.
The Rohr Jewish Learning Institute has the largest collection of Jewish media online. Hit subscribe for more.